Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to welcome you to the 33rd Annual Southern Festival of Books. My name is Alana White, and I am the chapter lead for the Mid-South chapter of the Historical Novel Society, which is an international organization of writers and readers who are trying to promote historical fiction around the world. In the before times, our local chapter met quarterly here in Nashville generally. We hope to return to that format soon. If you would like information about the Historical Novel Society in general, just go to the Historical Novel Society website. It's historicalnovelsociety.org. If you would like to connect with our chapter, our Mid-South chapter, we have a Facebook closed group, and we welcome people. We have people from Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, our environs. So anyway, we have a terrific presentation for you today. But first, I want to thank Humanities Tennessee, as always, for sponsoring this wonderful nonprofit free event. As I say, this is the 33rd year. I want to thank them along with all of our sponsors, including maybe especially Parnassus Books, our wonderful independent bookstore. If you've been to any of the other sessions or as you attended this one, you will see that you can go to their link and order the books of our presenters. Also, these days you can actually make an in-person visit to the store. I'm so delighted to be hosting this conversation today with three wonderful historical fiction authors. And so in alphabetical order, I'm going to introduce Denny Bryce. Thank you. Hi, Denny.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. With her wonderful book, you can see in the background there, Wild Women and the Blues, Julia Claiborne Johnson.
Here I am. Hello.
With her novel, Better Luck Next Time.
There it is.
And Joy Jordan Lake with A Gilded Moon.
Wow.
Denny is, I think, Denny, are you in Savannah? Are you in Savannah?
Yes, I am.
Julia, LA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm in Nashville. And Joy, I just want you to tell everyone.
I'm supposed to be in Nashville, but thanks to a canceled Southwest flight and the Boston Marathon, I am in a parking garage.
Oh, it's the marathon. Oh.
So this is my lovely backdrop. It's a parking garage.
Parking garage in her car. I mean, well, anyway, here's to you. So alphabetical order, Denny S. Bryce is a book critic for NPR Books and has written for USA Today and Harper's Bazaar, among other publications. Her debut novel, which is fabulous, Wild Women and the Blues, was named one of the most anticipated books of 2021 by Oprah Daily, Miss Magazine, Parade, and more. And as I say, she's in Savannah, Georgia. Julia Claiborne Johnson is the author of the best-selling novel Be Frank with Me, which was a finalist for the American Booksellers Association Best Debut Novel Award. The New York Times Book Review praised her latest title, which is the one we'll be talking about today, Better Luck Next Time, as a romantic comedy, comparing it with the big screen classics of the 1950s, adding, "It's hard to believe a cinematic version could be any more fun." After growing up on a farm in Tennessee, Julia moved to New York City, where she worked at Mademoiselle in Glamour magazines. She's joining us from LA. Joy Jordan Lake. I'm sorry. She's joining us.
I agree. Yes, thumbs up.
Go back and watch this. Anyway, she worked at Mademoiselle and Glamour, and she's in LA. But anyway, Joy Jordan Lake is the author of 8 books, including A Tangled Mercy, which was an Amazon #1 bestseller, and also an Editor's Choice recipient from the Historical Novel Society. One of the things that our society does is actually quarterly, if you remember, you get a glossy magazine in your actual mailbox with author interviews, book reviews, all kinds of wonderful things. And so her book was an Editor's Choice. We do a lot of reviews. Today she's with us with her new title, or her newest title, Under a Gilded Moon. Joy also writes popular children's books. Her first, Blue Hole back home, won the Christie Award for first novel. Joy lives outside Nashville when she's not lurking.
In a parking garage.
That does sound
That's
very
not fun, right? As I say, I'm Alana White, and my middle grade novel, Come Next Spring, is a coming of age story set in the Smokies. And I also write historical mystery fiction set in Renaissance Florence, Italy, on the edge of the water. So first, continuing in alphabetical order, Denny, whose book Wild Women in the Blues is set in Chicago in 1925 and 2015.
Yes.
And at that time in Chicago, that was the hot jazz capital of the world.
Absolutely. Well, jazz, of course, the 1920s is a jazz age.
Yeah.
And Chicago definitely had embraced jazz music in a major way. A lot of the African American musicians who left the South running from Jim Crow and ended up in the major cities up north, Chicago, Detroit, New York, of course, and Harlem, St. Louis, the list goes on. But Chicago had a special, I feel, very special connection to the jazz age. So it was an exciting opportunity to dive in. I'm a former Chicagoan as well. I've lived in every major city known to mankind, I feel like sometimes. But
can you say something about your main character, Honore
Dalcour.
Wonderful name. It just drips, with jazz and smoky nightclubs and everything.
Well, she's originally from New Orleans, and that's where the name Honore, I did a lot of research on naming her, her Creole roots, if you will. But she ends up with her family, as so many other African Americans did during this time period and over the following 20 plus years, the migration from the South to the North, as I said before, to escape the Jim Crow laws. And Chicago and Honore's a chorus girl. And she's... that's a very powerful connection for me. In my younger days, I was a professional dancer in New York.
No way. Awesome.
And Chicago. And that's where the cities come in, and I won't go into that detail. I'll keep that for another book. But but I wasn't around in 1925. Let me clarify.
Yes, I was.
Just in case there's any confusion.
Let me say, as the book opens in 2015, Honore.
2015.
Yeah, it goes from 1925 to 2015, and Honore is now 110 years old.
Yeah.
When a young man visits the nursing facility where she is, he's in the middle. Well, he's trying to.
He's in an emotional crisis.
Yes, he's trying to finish up his thesis.
Yes,
I'll let you talk about all that, and he's hoping that she can help him and that she will help him, because there's a question.
Those are two sides of a different coin as far as Honore is concerned. She has to be bargained with, if you will. I mean,
she's a tough lady.
Yeah, I really enjoyed writing her. She reminds me of my 95-year-old aunt, who is still drives her car every day. And the other week, she was telling me she went to a Gladys Knight conference. But she had her mask on. She was taking so that sort of energy I really wanted to put on the page, because so often, at least I come from a romance background. I did a lot of my growing up, if you will, as a writer in the romance world. And typically the main characters are, 22 or 18 or 25. And that's great. I'm just not that age anymore. And so, and I'm not as old as Honore, of course, but it was fun writing the just that, those different places in time that women have in their lives, from being a competitive young person with the future ahead of them to being older and looking back on your past and saying, okay, these are the things that I tolerate from these are the things that I don't, and I don't have to be gun shy about either.
Well, Julia, in Better Luck Next Time, it's 1938. And this is when wealthy women who want a quick divorce go to Reno, the divorce capital of the world, except it's not so quick. They have to live in the area for 6 weeks to establish residency. So in your book, they all go to this wonderfully named Flying Leap Dude Ranch to stay for those 6 weeks. And that gave you a wonderful opportunity to nest a story at that time and place. They're there waiting for their divorces to come through. Like Denny, you feature multiple characters. They're all there for different reasons. Can you tell us something about your wonderful, funny women and
how it came? Well, I was going to tell you first, it's got a lot in common hilariously with Denny's, because it's somebody who's in a retirement home telling the story of something that happened 50 years before. And there's even this, when you were talking about the chorus girl thing, I started cracking up because I forgot, like, this guy, our narrator, in his youth was super cute, and he had gotten a job as a fake cowboy on a divorce ranch, and he'd been pre-med at Yale and he had to drop out because his family lost all their money in the Depression. And he has changed from being a pre-med student to being more or less a chorus girl, because like every chore that they can do without their shirt on, they're supposed to do. And it was so interesting to me to have this character have the tables turned on him, where he's the eye candy versus the other way around. Like that, I loved that part about it. But in real life, in the 1930s, I may be jumping ahead of what you're going to ask me. My father actually had this job for a little while. He worked on as a fake cowboy on a divorce ranch outside of Reno. And that's sort of the genesis of it all. So, and my mother is a retired doctor. She's 92, and alas, is not as together as Denny's aunt is. She's been in a home for a while because she has terrible dementia.
And here's such a different situation. Under a Gilded Moon is set at the Biltmore House and environs around Asheville, North Carolina, as the estate is nearing completion by George Vanderbilt in the late 1800s. Your main character, a young woman, is in college in New York City when family circumstances call her back home to the Blue Ridge Mountains. She doesn't really want to go. The conflict over building the estate revolves around the fact that her family, it's a family of modest means. She was lucky to even get to go to college, to school. But they happen to own a parcel of land that George Vanderbilt, the Vanderbilt family, needs to complete that mansion. And so she comes home, she has very mixed feelings because that's going to not be so wonderful for the mountains, but it's money for the family. I was going to ask you to tell us about Carrie's situation and how you maybe came up with her. I know you're from that area.
And my great-grandmother was taught for a while, kind of a Christie-like character. She taught in a little bitty one-room schoolroom for several years as a very young woman. Just went off. She wasn't from the mountains, but just decided this was be a noble adventure. So it's partly based on, in fact, the school teacher in the novel is named Annie Lizzie Hobson, named after my great-grandmother. So it's partly that, partly I do come from those mountains. And so I was fascinated. I had intended to make it more of a Downton Abbey-esque book. But honestly, I was just fascinated by the people who were, really subsistence farmers. So that, and just, I kept taking these deep nerdy dives into, how do you make shoelaces out of squirrel hide and all that kind of stuff.
That's a useful skill.
Right. In case you ever need to know. I always love putting in my novels real people that nobody has ever heard of. And one of the characters is a guy named Robert Bratchett, who he's more memorialized at the Memorial to Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Ended life very tragically, but had this really interesting life. And so he's an African-American character who shows up there, actual guy, living in the Asheville area at the time. And so I love doing, I bet we all have our little nerdy dives where we, kind of find these characters and you slip them in just because that history is so, so it's so fun to find those nuggets that maybe everybody knows about,
Completely.
Actually, that was gonna be my next question for you. Carrie is fictional, but George Vanderbilt, of course, is a very real person. And I wondered how you decided. He has his own scenes and things like that. And I wondered how you made the decision. You could have taken maybe the easier route and just told in narration some things about us. But he's an actual character in the book. How did you make that dive?
I wanted him to be a character. I actually was prepared for him to be not very likable. I was thinking in my head, like his grandfather, kind of a pretty ruthless tycoon. He was actually a very, very nice guy and very philanthropic and loved books and horses and dogs and traveling and art. And I mean, how can you not love this man? So I really, he felt like a personal friend. So he didn't turn out to be a villain. But I didn't want to make him the main character because that would feel too constraining. I think we've all run into that, feel like, you have to write it a certain way and you have this idea of people looking over your shoulder who have a vested interest in this character and that kind of thing. So,
of course, today the Biltmore Mansion is visited by millions of people, I guess, every year. And I think I read that it's still the largest mansion or home in this country. I wondered what the present day Biltmore owners have thought about your book, if anything. You have communicated with them, I believe, on some level. Is that true?
I'm not communicated indirectly. So I'm not entirely sure. I just tried to make sure I wrote it so that I wasn't trying to please anyone, if you know what I mean. I'm sure we all know that as historical novelists, you don't want that person looking over your shoulder. You want to be free as a writer to try to really portray history as it was. But I ended up really finding it fascinating that he did a lot of incredibly admirable things. Like he was Mr. Sustainability before it was cool. And so there are a lot of fascinating things. But I tried to make sure it wasn't just a promo piece for the Biltmore. And here we have Christmas at Biltmore. Come visit. Just buy your ticket.
Well, it helps that you did like him. That he was a nice guy. So, Denny, as Honore makes her way through the heart of the Chicago jazz scene, we meet some well-known musical characters like Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway. You work them in so fluidly and so easily.
It's like I almost knew them, right?
Yeah. Great scenes. I mean, did you take special care with that?
To the extent that I read biographies about Oscar Michaud, for example. I read biographies about Louis Armstrong. Also, some fabulous documentaries. But the real discovery for me during my research was Lil Hardin Armstrong. So often you will hear more about, especially in that time period, because, the men were written about more. But you have noticed, I'm sure, that you have, screenplays about Bessie Smith recently, screenplays about more of the women of the blues and jazz age, especially going back to the 20s, 30s, and beyond. So bringing in Lil Hardin, a historical figure, and learning about her role in Chicago and how she brought in Louis Armstrong. She was essentially his Svengali in many ways, because she was the one who said, this is your marquee headline. You are the greatest trumpet player in the world. And that's what the Dreamland Cafe ended up putting on the billboard. But your question about incorporating these characters into the storyline, it was on track for her ambition, and she idolized Lil Hardin Armstrong because of her panache. She was the, queen of the stroll. And Monterey, was enamored. These are her aspirations, if you will. And so I was very, it felt fluid is what I'm trying to say. Once you get your research down. Now, again, I'm writing historical fiction versus the novel after the one I finish today.
Will you finish
one?
Throwing that out there for you. After I finish that one, next one I'm writing is biographical fiction, because when a real person, and when you were talking to Joy about making those choices and how those choices change, it's genre driven in many ways. What opportunity you have with a historical fiction where you pepper a story with fictional character, you pepper the story with historical figures, and then you build out from your fictional characters. The reverse is what I'll be doing in the book after I finish this one today.
Julia, you
Yes,
quote the actual judge whose biography
Yes.
you wrote. As he finalized each divorce, he pounded his gavel and declared, "Better luck next time." Hence your perfect title.
It's my perfect title.
Of course. Did that just go off like a light bulb? Like, wow. Or did you?
I have such a story for you. I'm glad we're all sitting down. I read, a lot of books about the 30s and everything I could find about the divorce industry. And I read George Bartlett's. I knew he was through the research, I knew he was the most famous divorce judge. I got his memoir and I read it, and it was fantastic. And I loved it. And so I was talking to my cousin Denise, who lived in the story, and she said, "Wait a minute. Judge Bartlett's grandson, Mike Bartlett, lives here in Como, and he's one of my best friends. And you know what? You've met him." And I was like, "What?" Because when my first book came out, I did the Oxford Book Festival, back in the before times when we could go in person. And Denise came up with her best friend and his wife and her husband, and we all had dinner. But I didn't realize George Bartlett was going to become so integral to my future at that point. So that was very exciting. So when my book came out, I sent it to Mike and I said, "Please thank your grandfather for being born," because his memoir was great. And he had a really funny joke in it, which I lifted, but I gave him credit in the acknowledgments because it made me laugh so hard every time I thought about it. I was like, that guy had a sense of humor because he saw all kinds of, heartbreak and suffering. And then there would be women who came in and said, he didn't like my hats. He played his music really loud when I was trying to concentrate, and like stuff like that. So he saw the whole gamut of the divorce experience, which was great. So
so interesting. So this is a little bit more technical, but speaking of characters and actually structure, Julie, I'll start with you.
Sure.
You have a present day point of view, but then of course we go back into the back and you sort of dip into his point of view in subtle ways several times, but we're very aware that that's where it's coming from. You don't do any breaks or anything like that. That's pretty tricky. I mean, how did you keep showing that?
I discovered after I wrote it that I had written it in second person. I thought it was first person, but when you're telling a story to a you, it's second person. Right. Pay more attention in school, Julia. But for example, one of the things you're talking about, and this was such a great thing that I found out doing research, the Jello shot was, now I'm going to blank on his name, Tom Lehrer. He writes funny songs. It was invented by a guy in the 1950s who writes the funny songs, and his last name is Lehrer, and I can't believe I can't think of his first name, but you would totally know it. Yes, Tom Lehrer. Because he was on an army base, and they weren't supposed to drink, so they would make Jello with alcohol in it, and hence the Jello shot. Because I have a whole Jello gag, because when my father puffled off the coil many years ago, and my mother was almost everybody in town's doctor, people kept coming to the door with these green Jello mold salads, and they'd have mushrooms, marshmallows in them. And, we must have gotten 80 of them. And so like he's talking about something at one point, and he's in a home and this person is visiting him, and he's like, would you like some of this Jello? And she's, obviously says no. And he says, I don't know how this got to be a dessert. And I mean, and every time I'd go to a funeral for one of my patients, I'd think, oh, I hope you like Jello mold because you're about to get a lot of them. So it's like stuff like that will just drop into it every now and then. And then he'll go back to his story. So, but that's the fun of research is you find stuff and you're like, oh my God, how can I write like 4 pages that I can use this little bit of information for? And you have to make sure had Jello been invented at that point, right? Were Jello molds a thing? Yes, they were in the 1930s. If anybody has any questions about Jello, I can answer them. So,
speaking of peppering a story with real people, did you ever think about having some young, well-known starlet show up, like a young Alana Turner? Not use her name, but that would have been kind of.
Well, no, they talk about it because in the 1930s, everybody went, and I did a book group just recently. It was all young women from Reno, and nobody remembered it. Nobody had ever heard of it. But for example. The Thin Man, William Powell, divorced Carol Lombard there. And so they could go on to marry other people. And it was, I wish I should have looked it up before. I have a whole list of all the movie stars that got divorced there in the, here it is, in the 1930s. And this is the cover of Life magazine from 1937. She's just gotten her divorce. She's in Reno. This is the courthouse. So you find out all these fun things. The courthouse was next door to the creek, the Truckee River. People would get divorced. They'd go throw their rings into the river, and then they could get married again like 5 minutes later. I did another book group where the woman told me she had gotten divorced there and had done all those things. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited. I don't get out much in case you can't tell.
So really, Wild Women in Blues is what I would call dual timeline because you have
storyline. Yes.
Dual,
Yeah, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm.
What drew you to that?
I'm a fan of the structure. I'm a huge fan of that story structure, and I get to do it again. I'm doing it again on the book that's due today. I'm a huge fan.
Did you have a book due today, Denny?
I was drawn to it because I'm a huge fan of that approach to storytelling. Some of my favorite authors who I feel do a beautiful job include Beatrice Williams and Kate Quinn and Chanel Cleaton. There are many others that use it differently. I just reviewed a woman, Anna Ray Jeffers, her book, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. 800 pages that fly, but she uses time in a beautiful way to really give you an impactful story, and it doesn't have the same, Diana Gabaldon, for example, the Outlander series, she plays with time and time structure to get to story. So it's, I feel like I know I'm going to do that because it's a thing that I like, and it helps you sustain tension, helps you sustain mystery, that sort of thing. And not that you can't do that as well in a linear storytelling, but I'm just a big fan of it. So that's what drew me to it.
And your perspective changes on a story. Like the way you experience it at 20 and the way you think about it 50 years later is really different. And that's what I loved about it.
Yeah. But yeah, just that, well, not just my book, but anytime I touch one of those structured stories that are structured that way, I'm usually going to have a very visceral reaction to it because I love it, especially when the author pulls it off. Because it's the last, those last chapters that resonate, because we've been having all of these things happening and pulling at you. What is going on? I credit, there's a book on the bestseller list right now that I feel does it brilliantly, and that's Taylor Reid's The Seven husbands of Evelyn Hugo is another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's just my fun place.
Further, did you write both stories and then weave them together?
Okay.
Everybody strap in. I'm ready.
Place. That's that was my first book, and so I approached it many different ways. So yeah, there was some linear writing on one side, and then I'm like, oh, let's try it this way, and then so I'm trying to smooth out my process, and this is just book 2. Did I mention I have a book?
Oh, book 2's the worst. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you guys.
I'm sending you all of my sympathy. Mine was the second one. I don't know if you went through this, Joy, but man, the second one is just a killer.
It is.
Thank you. I try to explain to people.
It's the worst. And my editor said the same thing, because she was like, I have many authors who are in this pickle right now, and they all think they're the only ones, and it's everybody. So
syndrome.
And I have to say, the dual timeline, Denny, give yourself credit for the book that's due today. It's so hard. My last novel was dual timeline, and I walked around by the end of it telling people, if I ever mention that I will ever do this again, just
shoot me now.
Yeah.
So my first one is dual timeline, and this one is 1928 and 1968.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good split.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's you can't have something funny happening in one timeline, and then the other timeline it's tragedy, and
that's the joke. The comedy writer's joke is comedy is tragedy plus time, so it has to go the other way.
Right. There you
20s will have to
love that. Ooh.
Joy, I was going to ask you.
I know. I'm sorry. I'll stop. I'm very starved for conversation. As you
We're having way too much fun here, ladies. Joy.
Yeah. All we need is a glass of wine, and we'd be good.
I know. We're ready.
I wish I could drink.
I know.
Anyway, Joy, you write from different points of view as well. How do you manage that? I mean, some people are visual, and they use maybe a poster board with different colored Post-it notes. Like, here's this character. I haven't seen her in a while. I better move that blue poster. How do you keep track of your people in your story?
I do that kind of thing sometimes. Different colored Post-it notes. Just that kind of thing. And I do love that, though. I have to say, anytime I beat myself up thinking, oh my gosh, just movie makers are just so far ahead of us in terms of being able to draw you into, what am I thinking? The days you beat yourself up as a writer. I do love that when I read or when I write, just that sense of trying to get inside someone else's head. To me, that's part of the fun of being a human being, is try to figure out what makes other people tick. And so I love that process of trying to get inside a character's head. But in terms of methodology, and I'm just realizing I have a finger over the camera. Sorry about that. That's what I get for being in a garage in Chinatown in Boston. But I do use all kinds of funky ways, different color index cards, different colors of highlighter, and just try to, keep track of who hasn't spoken up for a while and who needs more of a voice, and which character needs to shut up for a while, and that kind of thing. Because sometimes one character kind of takes over, which is okay if they're interesting enough, but but it's so much fun. I wish we could all be in person, because it's so much fun to learn from other writers about what they do and pick up on.
I was going to ask if you ever use Scrivener, because I love Scrivener.
Oh yeah, people love Scrivener. Yes. I gotta learn to use that. Do you use it too, Joy?
I started trying to use it, and I'm convinced I need to go back and try again, Denny. So you're convincing me, but I was at the beach with some friends when I started trying to, probably not the place to convince myself to use it.
One hand had a glass of wine in it.
Right.
It's so hard to type with just one hand.
Exactly. Thank you.
I was going to ask
well for you.
I was going to ask about Scrivener later, because I opened it up, looked at it, went, uh-oh.
Yeah, no, me too.
I backed right out of it.
Do you want to see my Post-it note stuff? Here it is. Whoops. There we go. I can't figure out where they can. Can you see all the different colors?
Yeah.
And then this is a big piece of cardboard over here. And the key is push pins. So that Post-its don't flitter away. So you need cardboard behind I'm letting you have this advice for free,
Okay.
everybody.
Wow.
Exact same thing in Scribner.
Oh, you can do that in Scrivener? Okay, Joy, you and I,
All right.
we'll fly here to LA, just get a different flight. We'll sit down and do it together. What do you say?
Can we do it in a parking garage? Because that's really part of the
Well, it
process.
is Los Angeles. They're pretty easy to find here. So.
I keep wondering, Joy, what you would do if someone came up and knocked on your window.
Well, I actually did. My family, I don't know if you saw them, my family just delivered Chinese food to the back seat.
Well, it is Chinatown.
Exactly. I hope they were not visible in the background, but they're being very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, seriously now, ladies.
What?
Please. I'm interested in what drew you to your particular story. We'll start again with you, Denny, because, I mean, a book is a big thing. I mean, it takes years.
Many pages.
It's in your heart, and it's in your life. It's in your heart forever. So just choices about who, what, and why. So we'll start.
Well, I'll say that my first book took me 6 years to write.
Wow. Really, or 6 months.
Say, yeah.
Right? Crazy.
I could be
That's
super
about
impressed.
how long the second one, but we won't talk about it. And I have always I guess in my heart of hearts, been a writer. As a marketing and PR person for many years. I used to relax by writing fan fiction of all things. And I wrote Buffy Spike fan fiction for years and was just enamored with doing that. And then I switched to romance and, learned a lot. One thing about the romance genre and world, Romance-landia, if you will, is that the training for development of your craft is such a huge focus, and you learn so much being in that genre. It wasn't the genre I, am writing, but relationships are a very important part. So when I first started this particular story, because I have written about 5 or 6 books, that may or may never see the light of day. It had a lot to do with 2 factors. There was an agent I'd won a contest with a partial that at the time was a historical romance, and they gave me some pointers, and I evolved that particular story into Wild Women in the Blues. And the connection between the dancer and the time period, because Julia mentioned her connection to one of her characters that she didn't know. Well, when I was a dancer in New York, I worked at a nightclub called The Cookery, where I was a waitress. And one of the people who was entertainer was a woman named Alberta Hunter. Alberta Hunter is in Wild Women in the Blues because she was a major blues singer star at that time. I met her in her 80s making a comeback. And I made so much money on the weekends that she worked. And both of us were Chicagoites, former Chicagoans. So my job was to bring her tea. And so she and I bonded, and I had no idea that I would ever write a book about the 1920s, because I was a kid, just sort of like flitting around New York, doing my New York thing. So there's the roots, or a little bit of the origin story of Wild Women in the Blues. And the title, I'll add quickly, is based on a song called Wild Women Don't Get the Blues by Ida B. Cox, I believe. That book came out in 1924. So I just spun it a little bit different.
So Julia, why a dude ranch called the Flying Leap?
Yes. Well, I made the name up. And, I grew up on a farm in Shelbyville, which is an hour south of Nashville. And I know a lot about farms and horses based on that. So I was able to sort of extrapolate what the ranch would be like. So, except there's probably more rain on our farm than there was there. But it was what was great about because by the time, how when your parents tell you a story and you think, oh God, here we go with this one again. When you're a kid, you're just like, you could please just shoot me now. But then by the time I was old enough to realize that everybody's father had not worked as a fake cowboy on a divorce ranch, he was, in his senescence. And so there was no access to this information. So I went to Reno to try to find him. And the people at the Reno the Historical Society were really excited because they said a book has never been written about this. And, and I couldn't find one either. So that was interesting. But they all tried to help me find him. But because I didn't know when he was there exactly or where, it freed me to make up the ranch itself, which was great. And I could make up its own rules, which was important because, they're not allowed to fraternize with the clientele. And I don't know if that was true on other ranches, but on the Flying Leap, yes, it was true. So that was really great. And just to be able to use like all your horse, like all the weird bits of information that you have was pretty great. So I think I'm free associating again. Stop. It'll go on for hours.
Oh, Joy, the Biltmore. The Biltmore estate. Why were you so drawn to setting a story there? It's not exactly set at the estate, but it's around the,
Right. So, lots of scenes are on the estate and lots around it in the mountains. And I just have always loved the North Carolina mountains. I grew up spending a lot of summers there. I was a camp counselor there a lot of summers. A couple of summers I got to be this was my favorite job title ever. I will be a very, very even older woman, and this will still be my favorite. I was the head sailing instructor on Lake Eden at Camp Rockmont for boys.
Oh.
Right? Right. I'm just saying. Yeah. So
that's the title of your next book.
Yeah.
God, that would sound like hotcakes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's fun. There was kind of a fun connection there. I got to meet the woman who is actually my age, very delightful, down to earth person. There's a long story behind it, but anyway, just got to go over to her house for pizza one night, and I was dressed straight out of the lake, literally with wet hair full of seaweed and fish fertilizer and cut off jeans and, smelling the fish fertilizer, and showed up at her house for pizza. And lovely person and just as hospitable as she could be. But turns out she was going to inherit the Biltmore estate one day. So I was a little bit, just, this much underdressed perhaps, but I was just intrigued even that night. I mean, my whole life, I've loved those mountains. They just kind of call to me. And, but I just remember that one night looking out over the back of her little house and across the pastures. And here was this massive, the largest private residence in the United States. And there I am doing a commercial for the Biltmore, but but I just remember thinking, me in my cutoff shorts and my fish fertilizer hair, I remember thinking, okay, here was one of the wealthiest guys in late 19th century who could have built and he traveled the world many times, could have built his house anywhere. He had one in Bar Harbor, Maine, also a good choice. And had a house in New York. And then, but this was his real love, the North Carolina mountains. And I remember sitting there thinking, we have a lot in common, George Vanderbilt and I. And just thinking how intriguing, because if I had all the money in the world, I too would have chosen maybe not a house.
I would have built the largest house in the United States.
Yes. Perhaps amazing. Not quite that big, but I really felt drawn to the place, I think, more than anything, and drawn to the people. The old thing about, to say the cat sat on the mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat is the beginning of a story. And this is very much the cat sat on the dog's mat kind of a story where, these wealthy people from Chicago and New York and Boston are discovering that the North Carolina mountains are beautiful and help the tuberculosis they're suffering from. And so they come in with all their money, and the train has come in and brought all these people in. And then you have these mountaineers who are very proud, but also struggling to survive. So some are excited that there's this new way to earn a living, and some are deeply resentful that their land is, that people want to buy up their land and the family farm is gone. So anyway, just that kind of conflict, as we all know, that's the beginning of a story. So.
While we're with you, I have more questions, but I don't want us to run out of time before we talk about your new books. Joy, you have a children's book that just came out this month, Sir Drake the Brave.
It actually comes out next week. It was delayed from supply chain.
Okay.
Oh, the supply chain. Oh, yeah.
And the illustrator is a local illustrator, Susan Eady. Y'all actually have an event later this month that I'm going to, but you want to share with local people where and when that is in case
Yes. We'd love to have anyone. It's in the Chenoweth neighborhood. It's open to the public. Susan will be there too. She's fabulous for anyone who's not met her. And it's October 30th from 2 to 4. And you can find it looking under my name or hers, following us on social media. But we'd love to. It's for kids or people who just love books. Or anyway, we'll have crafts for kids, but also, and then some of the money goes to folks who are for prosthetics, because the main character has a prosthetic leg. So,
Oh.
And that's outdoors, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, it is an outdoor event. So trying to be as COVID safe as we can.
And I believe you have a new contract. Can you tell us something about the next adult book, or is that still under wraps?
It's that's public now. It's I hope it's the beginning of a series, but it's a mystery set on the coast of Maine in 1950. So I'll be calling my friends Julia and Denny for lots of advice on history and Scrivener and all kinds of
all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. What to hold in one hand while I work with Scrivener on the other.
Exactly.
But it's I'm excited about it. I love mysteries. I'm a big Louise Penny fan. So it's set in a small town, just a little coastal village. But then Boston is the town nearby. I'm a big lover of Boston. So obviously, since I'm stuck here. So anyway,
you're a big fan of Boston's parking garages.
Exactly. Especially the parking garages, Julia. Yes.
Yes.
I know you. If anyone just now signed on, they're going to wonder what in the world. Parking garages, okay. Denny, you have a book coming out in March.
Yes. No, actually, my next book comes out April 26th. That's the one due today. It's copy. It's called In the Face of the Sun. It is a story, and that's a line from a poem by Langston Hughes called Dream Variations. And it's about, I think the best way to describe it is about two women's journeys that, and family, and also the time in which they live and how that impacts their interactions and their interests. There's the 1928 story is centered around the opening of a hotel called the Hotel Somerville, which was the first hotel in Los Angeles that was a luxury hotel for African Americans only, because African Americans had no hotels that they could stay at. And so one of my characters there is a chambermaid, and her life goes in interesting directions. And then in 1968, there's a story of a woman who's leaving her abusive husband, and the same woman from 1928 central character is her aunt. And 40 years later, and they're traveling together from Chicago to LA. And then after that, I have a book due in a few more months.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I know. And it's The Other Princess. It'll be my first William Morrow book, and it's a biographical fiction about Sarah Bonetta Forbes, or Forbes Bonetta. I'm messing up her name already. And she's a woman who was the African princess who ended up with Queen Victoria as her supposed charge when some things happened in West Africa. So
that'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that story right now.
Julia, what have you got?
I just started a third one. We won't talk about it at all. But here's the thing, and Denny, this is for you. Like when I turned in my second book, I had such bad PTSD from the second book experience that I decided to take my first novel, which you can see right here. It's called Be Frank With Me, and adapt. I live in Los Angeles. Remember this, key. Okay. Like, I'm going to adapt it into a screenplay because I know the story already, and it'll keep my hands and my mind busy, and I can pretend I'm working, but I won't be writing another novel right now. So, and then somebody optioned the book and the screenplay. So right now, like this week, I have to finish the polish on the screenplay, which is very exciting because if I finish it and they pay me, I can buy a new used car that costs $6,000 to replace my 17-year-old car that died last month. So
my
living a dream out here in Los Angeles, ladies. Come on out.
I love it.
But that's what I'm killing myself to try to do. And I don't know, Denny, if you or Joy, either one of you have tried to adapt things into a screenplay. It's really hard.
I'm never going to do it.
You have to squish it down. It's like writing poetry, except not really.
Yeah.
But so that's like, you're like, can you do this? Yeah, can you add all these things but make it 10-page shorter? And I was like, oh my God.
And then you have to do directions a certain way because it's actor driven, blah, 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 and all that.
And actually that one I wrote in Scrivener, but then I had to switch it to Final Draft so they could send it out. So just FYI. So you need to know several platforms.
Not doing it.
I know, exactly.
If they can buy it. And then they can
buy it. Yeah, let somebody else do it. But I was just like, oh man, I got to do something. So, because like I'm telling you, that second novel thing. But you're almost done. You're turning yours in tomorrow.
Yeah.
Moving on.
PTSD. What is it? I can't even remember.
PTSD. It's the worst.
I have it. I know.
You look great.
Yeah,
somebody with PTSD.
Go off my desk. We're just going to chat.
I'm going to rein y'all back in again. All of those covers, your covers are so wonderful. Denny, that dress, that is just, that's a beautiful dress, a beautiful cover. And I know that publishers usually tell you what cover they're going to use. But this dress is actually worn in the book. She makes that herself, doesn't she? She creates it.
Yes, she makes all of her clothes, and that's a thing I grabbed from my mother and my grandmother because they were fabulous seamstresses. The thing with the cover is interesting. Keeping in mind, used to run a marketing and PR firm for years. So I'm very I participate, if you will, in as much as I can. And this is the 4th treatment. The other 3 treatments for covers before that were entirely different. And pushback was a part of the process, me pushing back. When this image came through from one of the artists, everyone just said, yeah, that's it. And the scene in the book was changed to match the cover.
That is so interesting.
That's like in The Great Gatsby. That's what I was about to say. That's where the eyes of T.J. Ethelbert came from. It was from the cover art, and then he wrote it in.
I had to put it in there. She was originally secrets. Originally, she was wearing white.
Wow.
Oh, we feel so inside now.
We do, right?
Well, Julia, yours is wonderful as well.
Don't you love mine?
I do. It's a black and white photo, is it?
Yeah, let me. Here's a better. This is it was a Barnes and Noble book club pick for January, so that's this version. But I was like, I kept saying to him, "Not too cowboy, just please, not too cowboy," because I didn't want it to be like, "Oh, here's a book about Louis L'Amour," whatever. But the woman who designed Be Frank With Me, which you can see here, she also did this one, and she really I feel so seen by her. And I just did a book group last week where they said they picked it because they loved the cover so much.
Yeah.
And the 2 women in it, one of them is tall and blonde, and one of them is short and dark haired. Look, I really almost cried. I called the woman who designed its name, Mustafa. I'm going to miss her name. But we know each other. And I like text her and said, I love you so much. I can hardly stand it. Mumtaz Mustafa. There we go. I got it straight. She's brilliant. So I was very excited. And that was the first one because she understood me from going through it and see, this will happen to you next time, Denny. She'd gone through it before with me with this one. And she's like, I know how you go now. So
my cover reveal for the second book is already out and it's completely different. Very different. Yeah.
Joy, do you have much input in your covers?
They're great about listening to the author, and they were going for we were trying to make it not look too far on the women's fiction side, because I do have some very kind male readers. I don't want to lose with a cover that kind of screams, don't pick me up, you know. And they took a bunch of different, the first ones, as Denny said, you know, kind of just nobody quite, you know, some people would like it, some people like that, but none of us were all on board for anything. And then the designer took one of them and pulled back, toned it down, and turned it black and white. He was going for kind of a more Coles look. And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture, but it's so gorgeous what he did. He just nailed it. And she's looking out, so it doesn't scream maid or you know, ritzy, Biltmore, either one, but she's looking out into the mountains. And then when you take the paper cover off of the hardcover, he did this gorgeous thing of the mountains on the actual physical book itself.
Oh yeah, mine has that too. It has like a Pegasus. I was so excited to find it. You should look. Maybe there's a secret on yours too.
Well, I don't have a hardcover until I think my William Morrow book, because I come out in trade paperback with.
So we get to celebrate your hardcover, didn't
I know, that'll be so exciting. Where are we going? At whose house are we going to? I'm just curious. I guess Alana's.
I mean, cities. Savannah's cute, but life.
Maybe we can take turns. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we got plenty of parking garages here, Joe. That's noted.
That's important.
So if that's your thing.
All right, ladies, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else y'all would like to say or add, or just Denny? Thank God you get to go now. Pound your.
Finish my book.
I know exactly.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fun. This has been a lot of fun.
This has been fun. Thank you, Alana.
Maybe next year.
In person.
In person.
In person. It's a beautiful, beautiful October weekend here, and
the weather is gorgeous here too.
Is it?
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
All right.
And it is in the parking garage also.
It's what can I tell you?
Exactly. It never rains there.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks to the Southern
Bye,
Festival team.
everybody.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
us.
Alana.
Bye,
guys.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Take care.